Hi, thanks very much, Alex, and thank you so much for coming along to listen this morning, and also for taking part in what's quite a fairly grim icebreaker first thing in the morning before your breakfast, and that is, how would you like to die? So can I just ask, did anybody say in pain, or with no control, or in a clinic on their own in Switzerland? Good. That'll make this go a little bit smoother for me. Here we go, this is where I'm going to start. A lot of people ask me about my job as Director for Dignity and Dying in Scotland, and whether it gets kind of quite miserable being the death woman, going around and talking about dying all the time. And what I've found, and what I find is really, really important to get across, is that actually death is a part of life. And life is meaningful because it's a story, and in stories, endings matter. Death is a part of life, and our job is actually to campaign for a good life, and a good death is part of a good life. What we want to do is create more happy endings for those stories. So that was one of my disclaimers, is that I'm afraid the bad news is that death is inevitable, but the good news is that suffering is not. So my other disclaimer is that I stand here in front of you as a very committed feminist, and as some of you will know, a sort of a firm tenet of feminism, going back a little bit, is that the personal is political. For me, that's really true in terms of my own life and story and career, and also around assisted dying itself. It's for all of us, both personal and political. For me, it's actually the most progressive and exciting social campaign of our time. So a little bit about myself and my story to start. I graduated in the 90s and went to work in a campaign for the new Scottish Parliament, eventually ending up as a quite lowly research and press officer in that Parliament, which was great in terms of exposure to some really, really important social issues and some great campaigns. I got the chance then to go on and work for different charities and public sector organisations, all with a real firm commitment to equality and human rights, which was very important to me. I've been really lucky that the personal being political, I've been able to take what's personally important to me and work on that in my professional life. Most recently at the Red Cross, campaigning around ending stigma for asylum seekers and refugees, and ending destitution and increasing rights for that group, and then coming to work for Dignity and Dying. The best bit of career advice I was ever given was to advance until apprehended, and that's absolutely what I'm doing here today, gathering like-minded people who want to come and create, to create some real change, and just go for it until we get there or somebody stops us. So I also stand before you as a daughter, well, technically an orphan now, and I'm afraid that my mum had a really bad death. Bowel cancer ravaged her body quickly, and the end wasn't particularly pleasant. Chemotherapy hollowed her out. Morphine left her really disorientated and confused, and unable to eat anything, because one of the side effects of chemotherapy was ulcers that went all the way down the throat and down the esophagus. By the end, she was really nothing more than a bag of skin and bones. I looked at that and I knew that I wanted better. I wanted different for my mum, I want different for me, and I want different for anybody else who finds himself in a similar situation. And that brings me to compassion and the subject of today's talk. I want everybody to have the right to have a compassionate and peaceful death when the time is right for them. I started with stories, and I'm going to tell a few stories as we go through the talk today, starting with this wonderful lady, Yvonne, who lives not very far away in Edinburgh. I met Yvonne when I first took up post, and she was very keen as somebody living with terminal bowel cancer to join the campaign. She had a young family, has a youngish family. Sadly, since these photos were taken, Yvonne's not doing quite so well now, but her story is very important, as it really cuts to the heart of my organisation and what it does. She wants how and when she dies to be her choice. She doesn't want to wait until it's too late or have to take steps too early to end her life. She doesn't want to lose time. I've now met and worked with a lot of dying people, and this is an absolute preoccupation for them. They are worried about pain and suffering at the end, whether they'll be able to bear it, and whether they need to take steps too early, losing valuable time with friends and family, time on the things that matter to them. And if they don't take steps too early, either sadly through ending their lives themselves or going abroad to a clinic like Dignitas or Life Circle, what if they leave it too late and the suffering is too much? At the moment, dying people are not able to live because of this preoccupation. And what we really need to do is change that so that we give dying people the freedom to live while they're dying. Yvonne wants to die in a dignified way that allows us to celebrate her life and what it's worth. And she also doesn't want other people to suffer at the end. I'm going to talk a bit now about Flora's story, and I'm really delighted that in the room we've got Tracy Taylor, who has been quite an inspiration to me as I do this campaign. I've heard Tracy talk about her mum's story. Flora is Tracy's mum, and it's been so incredibly moving, and I just hope that I can do it justice for Tracy, who's here today. Some of you have maybe seen Flora before, because Tracy has very bravely used the pictures that she took of her mum, and they've gone global on a website called Flora's Voice and attracted media attention from different publications and outlets throughout the world. So Flora had MS for 40 years of her life. She was a wife, a mum, a gran, and ultimately even a great-gran, and had a happy life, but over the years the MS took its toll. And in the last 2 years of Flora's life, it took a real toll. In pain and unable to do anything for herself, her only wish was for the pain to end and to be allowed to die. I'm sorry, these images are going to be distressing, and they actually need to be distressing because we need to tell people the story of how people are still dying in Scotland in 2017. These were pictures taken by Tracy before her mum died. Flora suffered at the end, with her family, her medical team, and herself unable to actually realise her wishes that the pain should now stop. And Tracy has bravely shared this story so that she can stop that pain happening to people suffering similarly in the future. A few more stories now, and these are the kind of heroes of the movement. Again, some of you may recognise them. We have Debbie Purdy, Bob Cole, Diane Pretty, and the absolute game changer for assisted dying in the States, this lovely young woman with her gorgeous dog, is Brittany Maynard. Again, you may have heard of her. Her YouTube video explaining her reasons for wanting a medically assisted death went absolutely stratospheric. It's been seen by so many people. She was on the front cover of People magazine in the US and is personally responsible for millions of Californians now having the option of an assisted death if that's what's right for them. So Debbie Purdy had primary progressive MS, and Debbie knew that when the time came for her, she didn't want to suffer at the end. She wanted to go to Switzerland, but she was very worried that her husband Omar would be prosecuted. The Suicide Act in England and Wales makes the act of assisting a suicide a crime. People could face up to 14 years in jail. So Debbie took a landmark legal case that was to change the guidelines from the Director of Public Prosecutions, that anybody that would accompany someone to Switzerland wouldn't face prosecution. Debbie actually died in Britain, having had to refuse treatment. Bob Cole also went to Dignitas when he had lung cancer, terminal lung cancer. And Bob campaigned to really show that the fact that going to Switzerland is not by any means an easy option. Firstly, there is such an inequity about it, because in order to go, I'm afraid you need to have somewhere like £12,000 saved up. You also have to be physically fit enough to travel, which many terminally ill people are not. And you have to have really battled with bureaucracy to have so many bits of paperwork in place, medical certificates, marriage certificates, birth certificate, everything you need to have there. And Bob really wanted people to know that outsourcing this problem of dying to other countries is unfair, inequitable, and absolutely not the right way for people to die. Diane Pretty also took a landmark legal case. Diane had motor neuron disease and desperately wanted the doctors to help her die when she was unable to communicate, fed through a tube, catheterised and bedbound. She took her case to court, but sadly didn't win, and Diane died in a hospice in 2002 after refusing artificial ventilation. I mentioned before that Brittany Maynard was a game changer in the States. There are several US states that have medical aid in dying, it's called there, including Oregon, which was the outlier. Oregon was the early adopter. And you've been able to have an assisted death in Oregon since 1997. That's where we basically take all our research and base our model of what we're calling for is on the Oregon model, where mentally competent, terminally ill adults have the right to die. We don't campaign broader than that. This campaign isn't about assisted suicide. Dying people do not want to commit suicide, they're dying already. This is about when death is inevitable, that pain and suffering are not. That's the law that was brought in California. Also, if you're in Washington or Colorado, you can have an assisted death. If you're in Canada, there was another landmark legal case in Canada, a case that went to the Supreme Court, and that was what, it was the Supreme Court judgment that let Justin Trudeau introduce the legislation. And I have to say, although the courts really forced his hand, the court blinked first, as it were, Justin Trudeau really showed a great amount of leadership in saying that it was a very personal issue and a very important issue, and that he was proud to introduce it to the Canadian legislature. We all know that Switzerland has its clinics, Dignitas being the most famous, and also other parts of the world, the Benelux countries, so Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg, again have a bit of a wider definition of right to die laws there. Going the wrong way. So the last story is Noel Conway's story. Noel's had a lot of media attention at the moment. Dignity in Dying, my organisation, are supporting Noel with his case. Noel has motor neuron disease and speaks very, very, very eloquently about the fact that he does not want to die entombed in his own body. He knows what's coming with motor neuron disease, and he feels that not being able to die in the manner of his choosing is actually going against his human rights. That's the case that we're taking just now in England and Wales. If Noel is successful, we're just waiting to hear from the High Court. His case has been heard at the High Court and the judgment should be any day now. It would put pressure on the law to change again in England and Wales. It wouldn't have jurisdiction in Scotland, which is where I'm campaigning to change the law. So I'm really, really on the lookout for somebody here that would take a similar legal case and challenge the law and say that in Scotland, at the moment, the current law is broken and doesn't realise people's human rights. So, whistle-stop tour around the world and looking at some of the stories brings us back to Scotland. When I started the job, I was really delighted that one of the first lots of support we had came from the Herald and the Sunday Herald, who published this great leader. Everyone should be afforded the right when dying to die well. Now is the time for Scotland to lead the way for the rest of the UK. I absolutely agree with this. It won't surprise you to know, so do 82% of the population. That's the amount of our population that support assisted dying legislation. However, Sadly, our MSPs are really, really, really lagging behind. We've done quite a bit of polling of MSPs, and they're just not feeling brave enough, basically. They're too scared of the consequences of voting for assisted dying and not scared enough of the consequences of voting against. And my job is to create a tipping point that turns that around on its head. There's been 2 bills in Scotland that have fallen. So firstly, Margot MacDonald's bill in 2010, and then that bill was later taken up by Patrick Harvey in 2015. Only 37 MSPs voted out of 129 for the bill to progress to the next stage, and that fell. The next time this legislation comes to the Scottish Parliament, I am absolutely in it to win it. We need it to be the right bill. We need it to be the right person taking it. We need the support of the Scottish people, and we need those MSPs to have been exposed to stories like Flora's, like Noel's, like Yvonne's. We need them to understand that the personal is political. So I've got time, I think, for one very quick little story. As a communications person myself, I once went to a talk similar to this, although it was Alistair Campbell, the New Labour strategy comms guru, who was the keynote speaker. And he told a story about going to see Bill Clinton with Tony Blair in the States. And he said he had a bit of time with them at the end of the official business, and he just said, "Look, Bill, I've got to ask. The last time I was here and came to see you, you were about to be impeached, you were sleeping on the couch, your life was a mess. How did you turn it around?" And Bill Clinton said, "Well, that was easy. I worked out that my objective was to remain the President of the United States. So my strategy was to get up in the morning and do the things that only I could do as President of the United States. And my tactics was to make sure that everybody else knew about it." And since then, I've always thought of campaigns in terms of having a clear objective, knowing your strategy to achieve it, and then the tactics that come in under that strategy. So my objective is to change the culture around death and dying. It's to empower people at the end of their lives. It's to create a new standard for the end of life in Scotland, and it's to do that through an assisted dying legislation passing in the Scottish Parliament. My strategy is 3-pronged. It is to reach the Scottish people, to get out there and really inspire people that this is an issue that matters to them, to their families. It's a good life issue. A good death is part of a good life. We need people to care more about that and really put that pressure on the Scottish Parliament. That's the second bit of the strategy, creating that tipping point for MSPs. And thirdly, to pursue a legal strategy as well, to look for somebody, a Scottish Noel, a Scottish Brittany Maynard, although I do not want any 29-year-olds to have to face terminal brain cancer, somebody that can be the face of the campaign in the courts. And if that's the way that we win this, I'd be prepared to support that, having seen that work in Canada. So that's the strategy, public, political, legal. Now the tactics are the fun bit, because we can try anything to make this work, because we need to make this work. And that's why I'm really delighted to be in a room full of creative people who can create really compelling content, who can really, really help me reach the public and bring this issue to life. I would be over the moon to receive your ideas on what tactics we should take, how to engage with audiences, how to really, really add that creative dynamic, because we know that facts don't win campaigns. It's emotion that wins campaigns. If we look at the recent equal marriage victory, the value at the heart of that campaign was love. And to be against, for an MSP to vote against equal marriage, they were anti-love. And that was beautifully and really wonderfully creatively communicated, far and wide. And I want the same thing to happen for assisted dying. So please, please, please give me your ideas. I'm going to finish up now, going back to the Sunday Herald and the great leader that they wrote. Scotland, which has led the way in so many fights for equality, must summon its courage and move forward in this last great fight for the most fundamental of all human rights. That legislation will pass on the right to die is an inevitability. We have the chance now to act on a draft which is fair, safe and decent. History and those suffering from horrific illnesses across the land will rightly judge us if we fail to act any longer. I think that's true. I think in future people will look back at Flora's pictures. They'll look back at Yvonne's story, at Diane Pretty having to die refusing artificial ventilation, at Debbie Purdy having to campaign so that her husband wouldn't be prosecuted for helping her have a peaceful and safe death, and they'll wonder where our compassion was. Thank you.